and welcome to the 13th episode of Talk Wildlife. I hope that being 13 doesn't make it an unlucky episode, although it's not going to be the nicest of topics, and we're making sure that the next episode, episode 14, will be something a lot happier, just to counteract the sort of things we've been talking about lately. Anyway, this episode is called The Culling of Starlings, an example of flawed pest control, and today we're going to discuss the failings of conventional pest control with direct reference to a blog entry by Jason Enfield entitled Concerns over Annual Cull of Starlings, approved by Natural England. We'll discuss what Jason talks about in this blog entry and lead on to the example it gives about the way pest control is done and, more importantly, how it fails. And a big thanks to Jason for letting us use excerpts of this blog post. Let's talk wildlife. So first of all, what is a pest? Well, as Kev and I discuss in other episodes of ours, pretty much every animal out there can be deemed a pest. We cover this topic precisely in our Perceived Pests episodes. Due to our belief, and often our findings, let's just say that a pest can be any animal, but the definition in the Oxford Dictionary is an insect or animal that destroys plants, food, etc. Although it is used commonly by people to mean any animal causing someone some grievance or annoyance, such as foxes digging and fouling, gulls being noisy and swooping, seals stealing fish, in inverted commas, and basically every other animal for doing something that overlaps with the behaviour of humans in some way. So I'm going to briefly tell the story which is mentioned in this blog, and you can find it in full by searching the title which I've mentioned, or by looking at the description of this episode, because I'll put it in there. Then we're going to discuss the main points from the entry. As the blog entry explains, the story begins in 2010. Avon and Somerset police received complaints stating that people living next to a farmyard were having dead and dying starlings and lead shot landing in their gardens because of a farmer shooting them for pest control. And please note that whenever we say the word pest in this episode, or most others, that's again in inverted commas because we don't tend to see them as pests. So anyway, the farmer said that he had a licence from Natural England, but it actually came out that it had expired months earlier. So this man was committing a wildlife crime in doing this, not just shooting a bird without a licence, but shooting a red-listed bird at that. The starling, a bird that has fallen in number by 66% since the 1970s. So, did he receive a fine? Did he have his gun licence revoked or brought into question? Was he told that he was no longer allowed a licence for shooting from Natural England? No, it seems that none of these things happened. He was visited by a Natural England representative, told to shoot the birds in a way that would stop them or lead from falling into his neighbours' properties, and to deal with the wounded birds wherever possible. He was also warned not to shoot without a licence again, but then he was issued another licence, despite shooting the starlings without one. And from then, in 2010, until 2013, he continued to shoot starlings under licence because of his so-called pest problem. And in 2014 he was issued another licence after he spoke to Natural England again, telling them that the problem was continuing. He was allowed to kill 50 more starlings, but it seems that he didn't submit the required licence return for that year, so the figures of how many he actually did kill were never confirmed. 2015 to 2017 he reported that he was still having the problem, and again he was allowed to kill more. Natural England said there were, I quote, concerns about the presence of starlings on the cattle feed, resulting in the cattle suffering from scours, and large quantities of starling droppings are also being deposited on the metalwork in the farmyard. So by this point, the farmer has shot however many starlings he's wanted to, probably, for over 5 years and is still having problems. In 2020, this farmer was still allowed to cull starlings, so basically up until present day, and by this point he's now been doing so for 10 years, since he was first caught shooting them without a licence. Natural England mentions that this is because starlings continue to take cattle feed from the farmyard and are also potential carriers of disease that could be transmitted from starlings to cattle. The shooting is described as an aid to enhance existing scaring techniques. The whole thing just shows that this person's using the pest control argument to solve a problem which clearly isn't being solved through the so-called pest control.
Well, firstly, I would like to know on what grounds he was issued a licence and what exact licence he had. You know, was it for public health and safety, protecting food stocks? Because described are a number of different scenarios that one licence I don't think would cover all of. If it's droppings on metalwork within the farmyard and then stealing of food, well, the stealing of food I don't think is really going to cause too much to the cattle. The droppings on the steelwork, again, I don't think it's going to cause too much trouble, but there'll be two very different things. So I'd be really interested to know exactly what the licence was given for, what grounds it was given for. Because, when I'm doing my work, and I do non-lethal wildlife control work, but I have to go through the licence process, and you have to be very precise about what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, why you're doing it, and what you've tried before to stop it. So it'd be interesting to know those parts of his licence and why Natural England would continue or even offer a licence to someone who shot out with licence to start with.
Mm-hmm. Well, as Enfield says in the entry, the same scale of starling killing was done over the years. It's not like he started off doing, say, a couple hundred and then it went down to 50 because the problem wasn't as bad. It kept going at the same rate every year. And he was apparently using scaring tactics, but it doesn't seem that they were working. Or at least not to the level that they were really worth it.
Okay, and not just that, it's almost like it was a token gesture of 50 to be shot. Because if he's shooting 50 every year for how many years a year? 10 years? Surely after the second or third year, Natural England's got to look at that review and go, well, it's not working. One, you still need a licence. Two, there's still too many birds there. They need to find an alternative. They're literally stuck in a rut where they're allowing this to continue at the same rate. And it's like the 50 is like, well, you can do 50, but no more. But then is anyone actually checking those numbers?
Well, that's the thing. It says that 1 year, possibly more, he didn't even bother to return the figures. He can say he shot 50, but if he shoots 200, 300, who's there to make sure that 50 is the cut-off point?
Even if he's shooting 50 a year and the problem's still going on for 10 years, Natural England at some point have to review that and go, shooting them's not working because it keeps going on and on and on. And he could easily invest in new alternative deterrents and repellents to stop the starlings getting into the food.
It'd be interesting to know what he is using.
If he's using scaring techniques as quoted, he shouldn't have a need to cull at all.
The irony, though, is that apparently there's an RSPB reserve quite close to where this is taking place, and Natural England actually promote the spectacle, which is the large number of starlings that roost there.
On the same time as giving a licence every year to have 50 killed. And that's just one farm in the area. How many other farms in that area are doing the same thing? If you say there's 10 farms in that area, and they're all killing 50 a year, there's going to be a lot of starlings going. Then you go on to the potential carriers of disease part of this. What's your thoughts on that?
Every single animal is a potential carrier of disease. So it's just an explanation which gives an excuse without really saying anything.
Working in the industry, I almost see it like a loophole that people can use, because if there's not a real reason, or they're being sloppy about their application, and they just go, oh yeah, they're potential carriers of disease. Anything's got potential to be anything.
Exactly.
So it's almost like, I think it's like a loophole in the system where they should go, it's a potential carrier of disease. They should either go, yes, they're carrying a disease, which is...
And I found the evidence of this, and this is how it's affected my farm.
And again, you think over 10 years of doing this, he would have had some of those starlings tested for potentially carrying disease. Because if they're not found any disease being transferred to the cattle from these starlings, then surely that licence is invalid.
It's just an easy get-out clause. Why are you culling all these animals? Because they potentially carry disease. But the word potential is the big one here. Any animal can potentially carry disease. The farmer's dog, if he had one, could potentially have carried a disease.
And not just that, if they're potentially carrying disease, then surely there's another issue with these potentially disease-carrying birds landing in someone's garden, spreading the potential disease. But I mean, the whole licensing system itself, I believe, still needs an overhaul. And I know there's some great work going on at the moment to change that. And in Scotland, I'm even helping to try and change some of the licences up here regarding dealing with birds. And I still think there's a lot of work to be done in and around the licensing issue because they're not fit for purpose.
I mean, it says here in the entry that every year Natural England issues thousands of licences, and they rely on the so-called good practice of the licence holders to act honestly and responsibly under the terms of the licence. And that's just not going to happen. If they know they can get away with killing more, they're going to kill more if they feel they need to. And if they feel like the other methods aren't working, they're just going to keep killing them. So someone needs to work on Well, first of all, regulating it better, but also finding non-lethal ways of dealing with these problems.
But another really key aspect of what you were saying with some of the entries there from the blog is there are red-listed species. They're in severe decline.
66% since the 1970s.
66. And I know people probably listen to this go, yeah, but I see starlings all the time. I see their big flocks. But you know what? After the breeding season, you do get big flocks. But this is when these birds are being culled. And if they're in steep decline, my personal and my professional view is if a species is red-listed, amber-listed, it should be exempt from any culling. There should be none at all.
Shooting that licence, so obviously not having any respect for the licence, and then being allowed to kill, in theory, as many as he wants, for another 10 years. And I'm sure, if he's allowed to continue, 10 years from now, 2030, he'll still be at it.
So when I did my licensed work with herring gulls in Scotland, no one checked up on anything I done. No one checked on how many birds I took. No one checked that I took him where I said I was going to take him, and it was to a wildlife rescue centre. But if you've got hundreds of pest control companies in Scotland alone every week taking gulls, and they're saying, no, they're saying on the licence you can only take 5, there's no one that can rightfully check every single licence, every single person. There's so much chance for people to misuse these licences because there's no way practically they can be verified.
So from your experience of working under licence removing birds, how difficult to get away with malpractice is it?
I would say very easy. So one of my licences said I weren't allowed to take in more than 5 birds. So I went to the job. There was only 2 chicks that I had to remove and take to the wildlife rescue centre. But there was no one there checking, no one asking for any evidence, no one verifying the data that I submitted back in my returns. Because I'm an honest person, I did take the 2 birds. I said in my return I took 2 birds, and where I took them to the wildlife rescue. But there is so much opportunity there for someone who's not as honest.
Just to make it up.
To make it up. Yeah, they could take as many as they wanted. Because if the client's with them going, I've had enough, get rid of all these. I'm paying you to clear my roof of birds, rather than just take 5 of that 20 lot of birds. What do you think the guy's going to do? He's going to do the job because no one's watching him. And then when you submit your returns, there's no verification process. You do not have to prove anything that you've done. You just have to go, I took 2 birds. I took 5 birds.
And when you're applying for the licence, before you're granted the permission, is it drummed into you on the application the repercussions if you break the law and if you just make it up as you go along or lie and you're found out?
Not that I remember. There was none that I found in the licences I'd done in England and Scotland that highlighted what would happen if you broke the law.
So there's nothing really deterring you, and you're someone who obviously doesn't want to break the law because you care about the birds.
Yes.
But if you didn't care, there's nothing to remind you or to make you say, oh, I didn't realise how bad it would be for me if I did kill too many birds or I did take too many birds.
Yeah, there's no deterrent basically on there to stop people overstepping the mark, overstepping their licence. I mean, if they got found out and somehow someone got proof of how many birds they took...
Well, from this blog entry, yeah, but this blog entry suggests that nothing will happen. I'm sure it does to some people, but this man shot without a licence and he was allowed one for another 10 years and probably even more than that.
I think the licensing system in the UK, in all the different bodies who issue licences for control of animals, needs to be upheld. And I know there's really good work at the moment going on by Wild Justice, trying to change that, and they're challenging the licence issuers and the validity of these licences. And I know because of their work, some species have actually been removed from the licence altogether. But I still think you can take them. I still think there's loopholes where you can take them. And I think there needs to be greater accountability of people who are going out there and taking and killing birds. Or, as one of the things I'm trying to change in Scotland, is just to give pest control companies the option to take these birds and not kill them and take them to a wildlife rescue where everyone wins, because the pest controller does his job, their client's happy, the bird species, you know, it could be a red listed or amber listed species, which they're listed red or amber because they're in decline, are protected, and that may help the populations in the future. So it would make sense that, I can't remember the English process or the Welsh process, but it would make sense that the first thing these license issuers do is say to people, especially with the red ramblers species, is that they should take the chicks or eggs to a local wildlife rescue that they've arranged it with and hand them over to them so it protects populations. And plus, it means the pest control companies don't have to pay to have bodies removed if they do it legally and don't just dump the bodies somewhere.
So they say you have to exhaust all other options first without actually giving that as an option in itself.
Yes, exactly. And one of the license process I looked at, the 4 options were destroy, kill, or kill.
I think the worrying thing here, if we look at this specific example and expand upon it to encompass what may be going on and probably is going on all over the country, he shot a red listed species without a license. He didn't get in any trouble for it. He didn't get his gun license removed or any sort of charge or pay a fine. He was allowed to keep killing this red listed species for 10 years. He wasn't made to kill any fewer over the course of the 10 years, by the sounds of it. And he didn't even bother to return all of the reports he was meant to return.
I think one of the key things there that worries me is that he killed red-listed birds without license, knowingly, and they didn't question his honesty or integrity there. They continued allowing, expecting him to be law-abiding when he's already broke the law and got away with it.
They continued to trust what he said was the case, even though he'd already proven that he's not trustworthy.
Exactly. It's like having a key witness in court proving that key witness is a liar, and then just going, we'll take his evidence anyway.
And we'll use him for the next case.
Yeah. It just blows my mind that these organisations are the ones handing out licences, and then you get examples like this, and to them it almost seems like, silly mistake, never mind. And this is one case in the whole of England. How many more cases are there like this? How many other people have got licences and are killing more than they should?
The difference is this farmer was found out.
And the scary thing about that, the worst thing for him that happened was being found out, not being convicted, not being challenged or having his licence revoked.
The police didn't report him for shooting the Starlings without a licence. So, we've discussed briefly the failings of conventional pest control with regards to this case, and how it is the same all over the country. This isn't just a one-off thing. The problem at large is that people are reactionary, the problem isn't being solved, and it's so easy to get away with something that's so self-regulated.
This also highlights how bad the licensing system is, how many loopholes there are, and how can we really trust the people issuing these licenses when they know that people are not acting with honesty and integrity. There's no responsibility being taken. There's no one standing up going, yes, I made a mistake, I did this, I'm sorry, it won't happen again.
If shooting wasn't given as an option, or was even removed for a few years, it'd be interesting to see if deterrence and scarers and preventative measures would suddenly work a lot better because they had to put the time and effort into finding them. It's so easy when you can shoot something and kill something to use a preventive measure which isn't maybe very good or hasn't been hugely researched into, but if that's your only option, I bet they'd be a lot more successful because they'd have to be.
Just a side note, maybe in the long run over those 10 years, if the farmer would have thought, hang on a minute, these birds are struggling to find food, so they're having to come and collect the cattle food, because that's the easiest option, maybe he could have done something on his land to lure them away from his cattle sheds and actually give them somewhere they can properly forage for natural food, rather than having to come into his sheds and eat his cattle's food.
If he called you to his farm and he wanted a non-lethal solution, what do you think you'd be suggesting?
Well, the first thing I'll be looking at from what he's saying, or what he has said, is how he's feeding his cattle, where he's feeding his cattle. I'm assuming it's in a barn, and I'm assuming it's just in a trough. I think there's many ways that they can work around that. Do they have scarers on the edge of the barn to stop birds coming in? Is it a closed barn? Is it an open barn? what kind of troughs are they using? Are the troughs on a time system? Because if the food laying around all day, the cows are not going to eat it all day long. So you can have it that the food's only there for the time it needs to be there, not left all day so everything else can feed off it as well. Because that's lazy in my mind. It is lazy if you leave food out because you can't be bothered to manage the food process. There's got to be other ways there. There's got to be ways the farmer can either restrict their access into the building with repellents or deterrents, and also to re-examine the way he's feeding the cows and what he's feeding the cows. It could be a simple change of food he's given them that might put the starlings off.
If killing 50 starlings a year is worth it to him, then I don't see how them eating the cow's food is going to have a large effect on them. If you think of the size of 50 starlings, they're not going to be taking that much. They might cause mess, and he might say about the potential disease, but taking food was one of the examples given for why he needed to cull them, and I can't imagine 50 starlings take that much. In the course of a year, perhaps, but there's going to be crumbs lying around anyway. And if anything, it stops mice and rats if there's any left over.
True, but the starlings are only going to be there for a certain time of the year. They're not going to be there all year round. Breeding season, they'll move off. I mean, does he have starling nests on his farm? Is that something he should look at, preventing them from nesting on his farm? Or are they coming in when they're in the bigger flocks? There's all these other questions, I guess, that we don't know, which, as a professional wildlife consultant myself, I would look into and address these changes. Because there could be one or two little things that, if the farmer changed, might change the behaviour of the birds without having to harm them. And if he's having to kill 50 a year, and after 2 or 3 years of doing that, he's still having the same problem, that licence should be stopped. It's clearly not working. It's clearly being issued for whatever reason that he wants it for, but the people issuing it are not assessing this licence. They need to assess every licence individually, not just hit renew, because that's not the way to do it. If culling 50 for 2, 3 or 4 years isn't working, there's no point carrying on with it. It's just obviously clearly not solving your problem.
I think a lot of pest control is done reactionary rather than preventative. So people might put mouse traps down in their house every winter and they catch mice, whether lethally or non-lethally, and remove them. And they don't mind doing that once a year because they just see that as something they have to do. And the problem doesn't get worse and it doesn't get better, it just stays the same. And you could say that his shooting is just doing that, it's just keeping the problem at a manageable level. It's not getting better, but it's not getting worse.
Yeah, maybe. It just depends on how many birds there are flocking there. And I was assuming if he's shooting 50, I'm guessing he's got large flocks of starlings.
Well, the thing is, Natural England, if they're issuing a licence and they're allowing it to continue for 10 years, the same level of shooting, then they aren't protecting that red listed species. Because if it is the case that he's keeping a manageable level, that means that he's going to have to keep shooting them for the rest of his life, potentially. And Natural England is doing nothing to help starlings by doing that. They're not trying to encourage him to reduce the quota over the years or introduce more alternative methods. They're just letting him continue to kill 50 a year, possibly more if he wants to.
See, this is where it goes back to what I said earlier. I think red and amber listed species should not have any licenses issued to control, destroy, or kill. That just should not be a thing.
Don't think any should.
If they really, I agree, I don't think license should be issued at all. They get issued licenses for swallows and robins and blue tits, for goodness sake. But I think that these species which are already on the brink, they're already declining so fast. And remember, these declines don't happen in our time now. If they keep declining, you could be looking at birds which are already extinct effectively, because by the time they get to the tipping point, and they are so low in their number, you can get regional extinctions of certain birds because there's just not enough to sustain that regional population. Mm-hmm. And so I just think it's really awful. Sorry, Natural England, and any other licensing authority, if you're issuing licenses for red or amber listed species, and at the same time you're trying to promote, you're doing the best for our environment, the nature in our countries, I think you're drastically failing these species that you are the ones who are meant to be looking after.
With a name like Natural England as well.
Yeah. If you're listening to this and you've got something you'd like to add to the conversation, please do. We'll be really interested to hear it.
Yes, so do let us know your thoughts. What do you think about this farmer being allowed to kill 500 starlings effectively over 10 years? Do you think that it's okay to keep going at that level, or should it be reduced? Should it never have happened in the first place? What sort of penalties should there be for people flouting the law when it comes to licenses? I just wanted to do this episode to draw on this specific case and to explain how it represents a wider problem regarding pest control and culling as a whole. So I hope you understood the issues that we were talking about today and that something really needs done about it. Our next podcast is going to be a lot cheerier, so do look out for that one. And please remember to subscribe to us on YouTube, like our Facebook page, follow us on Instagram. All of these are at Talk Wildlife Podcast. We also have a Twitter now, which is at Talk Wildlife Pod, although we haven't been very active on that yet. We've got Podbean, you can follow us on Spotify, and listen to even more of the things we talk about.